There's nothing worse than having a lonely childhood. One where you wake up to an empty house, attend a lonely school life, and are welcomed back only to emptiness of vacant rooms, where the only proof of life are the bland meals left for you, and the notes hung on the fridge, the ones that promise to come home sooner than last night, but never do. I was little more than a roommate to my parents. Kids who had kids far too early themselves, trapped in a loveless marriage and cheating on each other behind thinly veiled excuses. I never understood why Mom didn't just admit that she was sleeping with the milkman, or why Dad wouldn't fess up and admit he liked raising Kimmy's children more than me. Behind the painted smiles and the hollow laughs, it was just a charade, one that even 9-year-old me could see through. When you're alone, you tend to cultivate a big imagination, use it to cope, to take you far away from the inadequacies of the real world. You make friends that feel more tangible than the gray you muddle through when you're forced to hop out of those covers. My friend's name is Mr. Tubbs. He had the body of a cat and the face of a child. He stood upright. His fur was a shiny black, and he had a collar he wore around his neck with a little red bell that jingled when he ran. I had first met him in my dreams, where he played and danced in brightly colored forests. We'd swing on trees and crawled through logs, bustling with laughter. Every time I felt the tugging of consciousness threaten to take me away from my friend, I begged him to come with me, pleaded with tears in my eyes for him to stay alongside me. You can imagine my surprise when I found him sitting on the edge of my bed one winter morning, smiling warmly at me. "I'd never leave you, Charlie." From then on, I wasn't lonely anymore. The house wasn't so cold. The air seemed to be electric as we bounced from couch to couch, his black paws tip-tapping behind me as we played hide and seek. Our favorite pastime was sitting by the window and watching the snowflakes fall lazily down and disappear into a sea of white. "It's just as beautiful as your head, Charlie," Mr. Tubbs whispered in awe. "I feel so lucky to finally get to see them in person." I watched a particularly beautiful snowflake dance in the wind as it fell to the earth. I turned to him with a smile on my face, an idea blooming in my head. "Have you ever felt the snow, Mr. Tubbs?" His blue eyes seemed to sparkle like diamonds as his face lit up with excitement, then fell as he too was hit with his own thoughts. "But you aren't allowed to go outside, Charlie, and your mom will be home soon." I glanced at the clock. Samantha would be here in less than 20 minutes. Time was running out, and I aimed to make it worthwhile before I did. "Then we'll have to be fast," I smiled at him before bolting out the door. "Charlie," he cried behind me. I could hear the hesitant pitter-patter pick up as he ran after me, the high-pitched chime of his bell closing in. He exploded out the door, the white of the sky and the snow taking a magical quality. We spent the afternoon laughing and making snow angels. Mr. Tubbs' fur was absolutely covered in white as the slush clung to him. We laid there peacefully, still giggling as we were gazing at the sky with rosy cheeks. It was then I turned to him and whispered thank you. He stared at the sky before he replied. I couldn't bear to see you all alone. It hurt my heart. Finally, he turned to look at me in my eyes before smiling once more. I don't want my heart to hurt, Charlie. I don't even want to leave you. I smiled. Inexplicable tears of some strange emotion welling in my eyes. I don't ever want you to leave either, Mr. Tubbs. The moment was nearly ruined by headlights reflecting in the distance. Samantha was home. Mr. Tubbs and I shot each other frantic looks as we ran inside as quickly as we could. I kicked my boots off as he ran upstairs to hide as he always did. I barely made it up the third step before a hand yanked me back. You little brat, Samantha snarled. Look at the mess you've made on the carpet. In my hurried fervor, I hadn't remembered to shake off what snow still hung on my clothes. The blackened slush stained the white carpet where I had ran. I'm sorry, I pleaded. I'll clean it up. And look at the house, she wailed. The couches are a mess. What did I tell you about jumping on the sofa, Charlie? I was playing with Mr. Tubbs. Her face paled as her other hand tightened around my arm. What the hell did I tell you about Mr. Tubbs? He's not real, Charlie, and you need to start acting like it. She was speaking through gritted teeth as the color came back to her. Go get your jacket. I came to pick you up so we can go see Dr. Sherman about this. I fought to free myself from her grasp, tears in my eyes as I screamed. I don't want to go. I hate Dr. Sherman. He's rude and he hurts Mr. Tubbs. Mr. Tubbs isn't real. He's just an imaginary friend. I've let you keep him for far too long. She yanked me towards the door as I looked back to see Mr. Tubbs staring horrified through the crack in the door. No. I was even more frantic, desperate to run away. I managed to slip my arm out of her crushing grip as I held onto the corner of a wall, halting her in place. Don't make me go. Don't make me go, Mom. Samantha pulled hard as I felt pain rip through my arm socket, making me lose my grip as I let go with a yelp. Before I knew it, I was halfway out the door, arms stretched out as I reached and screamed for Mr. Tubbs. Dr. Sherman had given Samantha and me some medicine. I didn't know what they were for. When Samantha asked, he pulled her away into the hall where I couldn't hear. When they came back, she looked like she was holding back tears. Hello again, Charlie, Dr. Sherman said warmly. I need you to start taking these pills, okay? He handed me what looked like 2 white Tic Tacs as he spoke. Don't worry. They'll make you strong. They'll keep away that monster you've been telling me about. I narrowed my eyes at him. Mr. Tubbs isn't a monster. He's my friend. His eyes flashed with a deep sadness. Behind his round glasses, his white eyebrows scrunching as he struggled with something I couldn't figure out. Mr. Stubbs isn't real, Charlie. You need to take these. His name's Mr. Tubbs, and he's not a monster. I was screaming now at the top of my lungs. I understand that, Charlie, but you need to— No, I cried, slapping the pills out of his hand. No, 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 no. I could hear Dr. Sherman call for a nurse, as everything seemed to go blurry. All I remembered were cold, gloved hands shoving those pills down my throat. Everything seemed to lose its edge, become softer, as they dissolved inside me. When I arrived back home, Mr. Tubbs was gone. Years went by. The pills changed names, as the dosage changed with them. I didn't know what they were called, since Samantha and Tom hid them away. Sometimes I'd take them whole. Other times, when I felt rowdy, they'd crush them into my food. One week, I refused to eat. As I did, I swore I heard Mr. Tubbs pitter-patter running towards me from just outside my door and down the hall. I could hear him frantically calling my name as I searched for him and fought to keep the door closed to keep my parents out. I swore I saw his blue eyes peeking at me from the closet when Tom finally tore the door down and forced those pills into me. The fighting was too much. Around 14, I learned to mellow out. At 16, I didn't struggle anymore. And at 20, swallowing the pills, when they were handed to me, became automatic. I was still alone. Once I started going to the local community college, it wasn't any better. No one cares about anyone else as they get older, and as the forced scheduling disappears and you lose those common faces that share your classrooms, there's no excuse to be polite anymore. As summer rolled around, something strange started to happen. Every time I walked through the quad and saw the emerald green leaves shaking in the wind, I could have sworn someone was calling my name. When I walked down the labyrinth of halls to get to class, I could hear a small pitter-patter turn the corner just before I did. This continued for months, the leaves turning a rich brown as fall graced us with its presence. I could hear someone calling my name clearly now. Whenever I chased the pitter-patters down those halls, I could barely make out something black dart away before I could reach it. It was the night of Thanksgiving when it happened. We had finished eating and headed off to bed under the threat of passing out from the food coma that the turkey had put us under. It was sometime after 12 when I was awoken by the high-pitched sounds of a bell at the foot of my bed. Groggily, I sat up. I reached for my glasses, prescribed to me once I hit puberty. As I fumbled to make out the dark shape illuminated partly by the streetlights creeping through the blinds. As my eyes focused, I felt my heart stop. There, eyes dazzling like diamonds as he smiled warmly, sat Mr. Tubbs. "Hello, Charlie," he spoke. His voice was still that of a 9-year-old. It looked as though he hadn't aged a day. I could see no malice, no resentment, or anything sinister in his eyes. All I saw were the eyes of an old friend meeting mine. Mr. Tubbs? I whispered, shell-shocked. He broke into a smile as he jumped into my arms with a fierce hug. I felt him shake as he sobbed into my chest. I've missed you so much, Charlie. His voice was cracking with emotion. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't even know what to say. I felt like I had been thrown into a storm, feelings bubbling inside me, but not a one could overpower the other as they fought for control. Finally, with tears threatening to fall, I wrapped my arms around him gently as I pulled him into a hug. I missed you too, Mr. Tubbs. My heart hurt so much seeing what they did to you. He pulled away as he stared long and hard at me, his tiny hand covering his mouth. I couldn't take it when they... He trailed off before burying his face back into my chest. They took me away from you. It's okay, Mr. Tubbs. I cooed as I ran my hand through his hair. You're back. That's all that matters. He shook as he continued to cry. No, Charlie. They want to take me away. They want to kill me, Charlie. My brows furrowed with worry as I held him. What do you mean? Who wants to kill you, Mr. Tubbs? Slowly, he pulled away and wiped his eyes, his gaze falling on the floor as he sat silently. It's okay, Mr. Tubbs. You can tell me. He shook his head as his lips quivered. No. You'll get mad at me. I won't get mad at you, Mr. Tubbs, I said as reassuringly as I could. I promise. He sniffled as he wiped his nose with his paw-like hand. He sat quietly for a long time before he faintly uttered, You promise? I nodded, mustering a weak smile. I promise. He looked me in the eyes as fear overwhelmed him. I hadn't seen anyone this scared in my life. My blood turned to ice as he whispered, almost inaudibly, Samantha and Tom. He told me how they had planned to kill him ever since I was 9. They had seen him after he had wandered onto the roof one summer night. He told me he wanted to see the stars, but the ground was too far away, and all he saw was blackness. He said the best way of doing it was climbing onto the roof, where we would be the highest. He helped me climb onto the windowsill by pushing the chair closer. I felt scared, standing, staring down at the jagged rocks beneath me on the ledge. But as he climbed with me and jumped the gap in front of us, he stretched his hand out and promised me it would be okay. Samantha's scream almost sent me over the edge as I stumbled and fell backward. My head had hit the corner of the sharp chair leg as a heavy flow of blood spilled out of my temple. Samantha had rushed to call an ambulance as my vision started to go black. Tom rushed in and shut the window as Mr. Tubbs scuttled away, still on the roof. I heard Samantha rush back and forth, holding me tight and trying to stop the bleeding from my head. She was hysterical, screaming at me. Tom, and the window. What the hell was that thing? I heard Tom ask in pure terror. I felt myself slip into the warm embrace of unconsciousness as I mumbled, "It's Mr. Tubbs." Since that night, Mr. Tubbs' high-pitched voice wavered. They've wanted to keep us apart, to kill me with those pills. My brow was still furrowed as I tried to reason with him. No, Mr. Tubbs. Dr. Sherman said. Dr. Sherman is a liar, he interrupted sharply. Don't you remember how he pinned you down and shoved those things down your throat? I felt the cold, gloved hands take hold of me as I shivered. Yes, but Tom and liars. They're just as bad as Dr. Sherman. I could hear a low growl coming from somewhere. A growl like a beast about to strike. All they've done is shove those pills down your throat. Don't you remember the bruises they gave you when you tried to defend yourself and stop them from force-feeding you? He sat closer as his tiny hand took mine. They left you alone, Charlie. Alone all through your life without a single care for your well-being. He paused as he fought the tears in his eyes. I'd never leave you, Charlie. The sincerity, the care, the loneliness of it all. I felt myself get lost in that swirling typhoon of emotion before something broke inside me. It made sense. I'd never leave you either, Mr. Tubbs, I said in tears. His eyes were wet with joy as he sniffled. Then know what we have to do. We tiptoed down the hall, creeping down the stairs as we made our way back into the kitchen. I helped Mr. Tubbs onto the counter as he browsed the wooden block filled with handles. As he pulled out a long and shiny steak knife with his eyes shone with delight. This one. I took it in my hand as we made our way back. He was positively dancing with excitement. Every step he took, he shook with anticipation, inching closer until I finally held the doorknob in my hand. With a long creak, it slowly swung open. I felt my heart pounding, my vision throbbing as the veins in my head shook with blood. Slowly, I stepped closer, the knife raised and glinting in the moonlight, peeking through trees out their window. I stared at their sleeping bodies, the handle held high over my head. I turned to see Mr. Tubbs standing stock still at the foot of the door, a cold, twisted smile curling onto his ruby lips. His eyes were no longer blue, but as black as the matted fur on his thin, gangly body. The sight of him shook me to my core as I let out a loud gasp of fear. I heard Samantha rustle awake as she screamed to life. The house broke out into a commotion as I stumbled backwards. Tom lunged at me as he threw the knife away and dove on top of me. I felt his hands restrain me, painfully, as his wide, frightened eyes threatened to fall out of his head. "The door," Samantha shrieked. "The door." I saw Tom turn as his grip loosened and his face drained of color. When I turned to see what he was looking at, I saw Mr. Tubbs scurrying away like a cockroach, up the walls and down the stairs. I heard his voice like nails scraping against chalk as he let out a howl and shook the walls. I could hear the window shatter downstairs and the pounding of the walls as he scrambled onto the roof above us. Tom snapped his head back to me before jerking to face Samantha. "The pills," he barked. "The pills." Samantha was a blur as she shot around the place, tearing out drawers and boxes from all around the room. "I can't find them," she was hysterical. "Tom, I can't find them." "The closet." He fired as he shot up and ran to shut the door. I sat up and pressed myself against the wall in fear as he darted to latch the window, the stomping and howling on the roof growing louder. Samantha finally held up a small plastic canister as she twisted off the top and ran to me with the 2 white pills. "Open your mouth, Charlie." Her fat fingers were jabbing against my tightly held together lips as her long nails cut my skin open. I felt blood start to drip down my chin, like it always had when this happened. "No," I cried as I fought to twist her hand out of my face. "I want to know what." I felt her hand cover my mouth as she slipped them down my throat and forced me to swallow. The world went soft again as I calmed down, the howling and the banging fading away as they slowly died out. "I don't know how long I can do this, Tom," I heard her say, exasperated and on the edge of tears. "It's not just schizophrenia. You saw that thing. We can't. They work." Tom barked sharply, grabbing Samantha by the arm and shaking her as he spoke. "They work. Those pills work, and it's the only thing that keeps away that thing. I don't know how, and I don't want to know, as long as it stays away." He let her go forcefully as she devolved into a weeping mess. Tom walked me back to my room, my head barely making contact with the covers before I passed out. I've been to see Dr. Sherman a few times now, each one with less hope in my eyes than the last. I could tell they were running out of options. All they could seem to do was up my dosage again. It's been a full 6 months since the accident, and I haven't had any problems. I've still been alone, and I've still been replaying that night in my mind. I can't get the image of Mr. Tubbs' twisted smile out of my head. I feel tired, and I feel terrified. Yesterday, as I was making my way to class, I heard the soft sound of a bell ringing behind me. I can hear something whispering in my ear from the foot of my bed as I try to sleep at night. Only this time, there is no warmth. I'll never leave you, Charlie.